first time I went to clubbing, it was in Japan. I had never been to any clubs. In my country, there's no like nightlife, and there's no clubs, at least official ones. And the image is actually very like dark, like almost scary. Like, you know what's gonna happen, and like a negative image, really.
I started clubbing pretty young, like 16 or so. I think it's like usually it's norm in Europe, something like that. So you start going out like very young. You do it for like the adrenaline of it, doing something illegal as a teen. But also I think it's to escape kind of like your generation a bit.
I started going to clubs during my first year of university. I had just moved to Paris. I was living alone for the first time, and discovering a big city, meeting new people, and going out felt very natural at the moment. It was just like something you go through when you enter student life.
When it comes to clubbing in general, I started after graduating from college. At the time, I was living near a nightlife center, and I was in the Philippines, where I'm from. I was living in Makati, and there was this like nightlife center where a lot of people just went to for clubbing, and I just kind of got dragged into that. I had a couple of friends living in Makati as well, so we would club there from time to time.
The first time I was actually pretty stressed, I remember. And I started searching for clubs like in internet and on the maps. And I was looking for like a club with good music, really. So that's what I was searching, but I didn't really expect anything. I didn't even know what to expect.
Very quickly, my relationship to clubs started to evolve. I was less and less interested in mainstream and commercial nightlife, but more drawn by independent and artistic scenes. With my friends, we saw it as a way of sustaining the minority artistic scene. When I arrived in Tokyo, I had the same intentions. Through some friends here, I was introduced to some spaces of expression and sharing created by minority groups. They were always very sensitive and intense and eccentric, but what mattered was that they felt meaningful for us.
When it comes to clubbing in Tokyo, I started maybe shortly after moving to Japan, maybe a couple of months. I have this Filipino friend. We're part of the same scholarship program, and we basically moved at the same time. And he just wanted to try this clubbing scene here in Tokyo. So, I just, went along with him, went along with his suggestion, and we just tried clubbing, and that's just how it started.
I think I went to a lot of like commercial club in my youth. So now I'm a bit more picky about that, especially maybe more in Tokyo. Of course, I went out to some big clubs in Shibuya or Shinjuku with some of the guys I met here. I think I'm more picky, and I'm more like kind of wanting to get to some, I don't know, locals or more or some clubs that will have some music more according to what I like and the vibe. Like I'm very interested into the vibe of the club and how I could really enjoy those moments just also without alcohol or any substances. So that's something I have to uh, look at for before going out. If not, like I don't know, I'm not really enjoying myself anymore in those clubs.
The places I usually go to are therefore not centered around consumption or nightlife as a lifestyle product, but they are curated spaces.
I used to go to a small club which was very into like playing different kinds of music and like getting artists who were like actual like big or kind of big artists, not like top of the line, but like relatively like underground. And the club was very friendly. I didn't like interact with anyone everyone was there for the music. No one was like mingling with anyone. After a while, I started inviting other friends to the club, and one of the friends was like, "Let's go to the biggest club." The other club that we went to was like um, like 4 floor of like different music genres, and it was packed on like a weekday. That club was like mostly like people did not go there for music. It was more like a social club. So it's mostly like boys and girls aged like early 20s, I would say.
When it comes to the clubs I go to in Tokyo, I usually like those small nightclubs. I have tried like larger clubs, those clubs that have different floors, but I think I like the small clubs better. What I imagine is something like a bar with a dance floor.
When I go to club, I usually have very clear expectations. I don't necessarily need to know the lineup in advance or the artist in advance, but I do need to trust the place.
I got, I wouldn't say addicted, but I got into clubbing as an activity, as like a normal activity in my life pretty quickly. As soon as I went there the first time, the week after that, I was there again. It kind of became a normal, like, pastime hobby for me, really. And it was just a cool place to go and have a drink and smoke some cigarettes and listen to good music.
I don't really look for places that are optimized for consumption and where the priority is selling drinks, attract people, or producing an image, having the biggest names on their lineup or the guest list. In those spaces, I think the sensory experience feels standardized and repetitive and disconnected from any form of cultural and artistic intention.
The atmosphere is also something I'm considering. If the energy is welcoming and it's all about having a good time, then it's a club that for sure I'm going to enjoy. And I also feel a bit more comfortable seeing foreigners around. I think it makes me feel more welcome, if there are foreigners around. Just it kind of assures me that this place is like foreigner friendly and stuff like that. Even though I never really experienced outright discrimination as a foreigner when it comes to clubbing here in Tokyo.
I have no expectation at all because, like I said, it's not my home country, so I'm just really try to enjoy the moment. Anything can happen, right? I can meet some new people in night and stay with them like until the end of the party, or just going out, going in again. Sometimes I feel like if you choose the right club, like maybe local small one, you kind of get the feeling of as a tourist. I mean, like find the people living in the city because you don't see them acting as themselves like anywhere else. So sometimes you just bump into a club like kind of hiding because the streets are empty and like the club is not so like okay there's a place where all the people are. So first of all you're like okay, and after you're like oh, and that's also something I wouldn't expect, and I don't know how to interact. I don't know the language, so I'm like really with the flow, no expectation at all, and every night is different here. So that has been a really good surprise for me until now.
Over time, I also started to get more involved directly through my own practice. I'm a photographer. This position gave me a different type of access. Being close to the artist, I could have deeper conversation with them about their job, how they perceive these spaces, their audiences, and the role of clubbing in their lives. I met a queer DJ collective who designed their parties almost like musical museums. They take their work very seriously, and while remaining extremely free and authentic.
What I had seen from clubs before I went to a club for the first time was only through movies. It was all this image of like a dark place with like lights and like everyone dancing around, and it's pitch black, you don't see anything, but at the same time the lights go on and off.
What the fuck are we doing here? Woo! Look at all that. Hey!
The first sensation I notice is definitely sound. That's because the sounds inside the club is muted from the outside, but when, for example, the bouncers opens the door, then the music just blasts to your ears, and that's kind of like the first thing that registers to me. Another thing would be the light. The lights don't come as immediately as sound does, because like the entrance can be a bit weird. There can be like a curtain, for example. Like the way to the dance floor might be guarded or covered, for example.
Not bad, right? Muy bueno, my man. Muy fucking bueno. You want to grab that booth over there? I'll get a couple drinks. I'll meet you on the dance floor. Okay. ビール2つください。
Outside, you are exposed to the city, so its rhythms and its norms and its codes. But suddenly, you go inside, those rules are at least partially suspended. The sound changes, the light changes, the way bodies behave changes. But in other cases, the club is more exposed, more visible, and more integrated to the urban fabric. And I think that changes the experience completely, because people behave completely different when they feel seen from the outside, when the boundaries between the public and the private are blurred.
Some things I consider are music. Music is very important. Like the music has to match kind of like my taste. It doesn't have to exactly match it, but I have to at least know what I'm listening to, and I have to be able to dance to the music. And in this regard, I think pop music is something that I look for, especially like 2000s, 2010s pop music, Western pop music in particular.
Music is obviously central because it's the element that structure time, movement, flows, and attention. But music alone is not enough. What really makes an experience meaningful for me is the way sound interacts with space. So the acoustics, the volume, the way bass travels through the room and through bodies.
Loudness was a factor, really. Because, like, I would say I miss some loudness since I've been living here. In terms of music, the music I like is the music that plays more as a background to your like social interactions, instead of something that's like super heavy and like is the music shouldn't be the main star for me in the club. Of course, not the main star, but it should complement the atmosphere that the club is building. The music is not the objective. You go to some clubs, they're playing the same thing again and again, but it works because it's the atmosphere that it's creating. So you definitely have felt this, but when you listen to like good music and your skin kind of starts like turning into like your hair kind of stands up, and my body starts like shaking and in a good way.
I think the lighting is like kind of what I gonna be most sensible of, because I find it kind of hypnotizing when I enter the club and like kind of just being attracted to some place just with the lighting or the sound.
It's not such a big factor, but I do get a feel of whether the lights are too bright or too dark, and that kind of like affects my impression of the place as well.
Light is also very important. I'm very sensitive to lighting, especially low or indirect light.
The club itself is dark usually. I think one of the reasons it is dark is that people can be more easily themselves, can let themselves out more easily, really. And I cannot imagine that if a club, say, was like this bright, I cannot imagine, even if it had those dancing lights, that people would be as free as they are in a normal dark club. So
I think that darkness allows people to disappear a little and to stop performing socially and to focus on sensation rather than appearance. So it creates a form of equality between bodies, genres, styles. Scenography and spatial organization matter as well. I guess these elements influence how safe and comfortable people feel, especially those who are more vulnerable or less represented in dominant social spaces.
But mostly I think like just looking out, like crossing the room, like locating kind of the different part of the club, like kind of searching where is the stage, where is the bar, or some stuff like that, or searching for friends.
You know, the vibe is this Gen Z word that, you know, like a lot of young people just throw around. I think when it comes to the vibe, that's really like kind of like what clubbing produces, and it's the vibe is something that doesn't really translate easily into words. That's because the vibe is this sort of like consolidation of feelings and senses, and these feelings and senses, some of them can go beyond our everyday vocabulary. When the vibe is right, or you know, when we vibe, or when it vibes, or something like that.
It's something that we feel and we don't talk about that much in a literal sense, because you have to experience it to know how it was. And that also a thing about how social it is, because if you didn't went out with your friends at a party or something, you'll have missed out something you cannot understand.
When I go to a club, I'm like definitely go towards the center. I don't want to like, be out of the main core of what's happening. I kind of want it to be always near the core at least. And if there's like a stage, I try to usually go near the front, which is these places are definitely more crowded than like the outer parts.
It also relies on a lot of gut feeling, which to me precedes the order of language and goes beyond rationality. So, you know, the club produces this like feeling of vibe. It's not just feeling though, it's also sensing. But the club produces this vibe, and gut feeling in itself is kind of elusive as a concept. Can be spiritual even.
It makes me think about Michel Foucault's concept of heterotopia. He described heterotopias as other spaces that exist within society but operate according to different roles, different temporalities, and different social norms. What is interesting is that heterotopias are not imaginary spaces. They are actually mostly part of our daily life. But they function in opposition to normal social organization. Foucault explains that we usually understand society as a network of places assigned to specific functions, so working, resting, consuming, caring, isolating, and heterotopias disrupt this logic. So for me, nightclubs fit extremely well within this description. They exist in direct opposition to daytime, salaried productive life, because they are spaces where bodies are not optimized for work. Another key principle is heterochrony, so the rupture with ordinary time. And you know, in clubs, time becomes unstable. You lose track of hours, sometimes of days, and the experience follows musical rhythms rather than clock time. So this temporal suspension is essential to the intensity of the experience. Heterotopias are also spaces that open and close, and they are not freely accessible. Entry is filtered, sometimes strictly, and this filtering is not neutral. It defines who is allowed to enter, under which conditions, and for how long. And it's exactly the same for clubs.
Because the atmosphere is like one thing, the establishment, how it looks, the music, the lights, the stage, That's on one hand, and on the other hand, you have like the social aspect of like people in the club. What are they doing? They're having fun, and you kind of feel like, okay, I should also have fun.
When you're surrounded by sound, movement, heat, light, and bodies, your senses are working constantly nonstop and cannot really escape that state. And overstimulation doesn't usually come suddenly, it builds up without showing until you achieve that state, that very specific overload. It can start with physical fatigue, but also annoyance due to a repetitive sound or light, or with a feeling of social exhaustion, or something, or sometimes it's just boredom, but other times it's just physical. Too much heat, too much light, too much noises, too much movement for too long.
During the night, like at first you're just getting there, you have still some part of the outside, like you carry some part of the outside with you, like into the club, and at some point, like you just totally become like in it, like living the moment and not thinking about anything else. And I think that's how the overstimulation gets, because it made you thinking about anything else than what you actually feel, because you have so much feeling, so much light, smell, the people touching you, bumping into you, like so much kind of things to take into account that you cannot think about anything else. And I think that's how overstimulated can be defined.
There were several moments when I felt overwhelmed and overstimulated, and that is usually accompanied by exhaustion. You know, I feel like it has to do with lack of space. Lack of space is what makes me feel overwhelmed more so than the blinding lights or the loud sounds. So I feel like this sense of claustrophobia is what, you know, makes me feel overwhelmed. And when that happens, I usually go to the restroom, or I usually take a break outside and then just come back to the dance floor and stuff like that. For sure, the lights and the sounds, they're part of the overwhelming process. But, I really just need like a space to myself sometimes, and maybe like a bit of quiet.
I think the whole experience is really about being overwhelmed or overstimulated. So the place where you can kind of understand that you've been overstimulated the whole time is when you take a break. Like for me, it's when I go to the smoking room. Near the stage, the interaction is much more like bodily, I would say. Everyone's dancing. Once you get off and go to a place like the smoking room, the interaction is like reverted back to the normal, I would say, like conversational. I would say every time that I go to the smoking room, I kind of feel like, whoa, what was that?
Foucault also explains that heterotopias often combine several incompatible spaces within a single place. So in clubs, this is very clear. You have the dance floor, the stage, the bar, the smoking area, the cloakroom, and each of these spaces has its own codes, rhythms, and behaviors, and yet they coexist within one enclosed environment. Foucault often associates heterotopias with spaces of isolation, so places where society puts what doesn't fit. And in a way, I think clubs can produce a similar feeling. Even when they are spaces of protection and freedom, they remain separated, negotiated, and sometimes hidden from the city.
It does produce feelings that you don't really have outside of club, like outside of, I would say, a place like a club. I wouldn't say it's nervousness, but I would say it's more like an excitement every time I go to a new club, because you don't know what's gonna happen. your heart rate's gonna go up.
The thing is with the club, it's that you're so overstimulated that you cannot translate sensory perceptions into emotion easily. So you just get like the sensory overload, and like you will making sense of everything that happens, like maybe sometime later, maybe in a week, maybe the day after. You could only make sense of what you did sometimes after experiencing it, because you were so stimulated you couldn't think about it. And I think mostly when you think about like all the night you went out or clubbing, I mean, like I think you more thinking about what you felt, about all the sensory impulse you had, more than the emotions. You think about the lights, all your friends shouting and some stuff like that, but not the actual moment, because you cannot remember it because of how stimulated you were.
When overstimulation becomes too strong, I've learned to manage it through very concrete strategies. Most of them come from techniques used to deal with anxiety. I focus on my senses one by one, starting with the least dominant. So I begin with taste and I wonder, do I need water, sugar, some fresh air? And then touch. I ask myself, am I too compressed by the crowd, or do I need to be physically close to someone I trust? And I adjust my position, my clothing, my posture. Then I do the same for smell, then sound, and finally sight. And I try to identify what I can control and what I cannot, what comes from my body and what comes from the environment. I think a big factor is involuntary hypervigilance. Many people, especially women, queer, racialized people, or just those who are used to going out alone, we develop this reflex of constantly scanning the environment. And when you naturally achieve this kind of hyper awareness because of stress, excitement, trance, you become very sensitive to anything that breaks the flow. And this makes it harder to fully disconnect and let it go completely, even in spaces that are supposed to feel safe. When bodies are that connected, any disruption becomes immediately visible.
I never went alone. I always go with others. And that's because I see clubbing as a social activity to do with friends more than anything else, really. Actually, I don't even, invite people to go to clubs with me. I wait for an invitation and then we go clubbing. I mean, I may hint that I want to go to a club here and there, but like it's usually me getting invited. I think this has largely to do with the idea that I look at clubbing as a group leisurely activity rather than as an individual leisurely activity. It's kind of like drinking. I don't usually drink alone. I usually drink in a social setting. Similarly, when it comes to clubbing,
I can go to clubs either alone or with people. I go mainly for the artistic experience and the sensory experience, so I don't need company to enjoy the sensory experience.
I usually go with others. I would want to try to go alone for sure, because I think clubs are a very social space, so you can always meet people. I think that's one of the places you go and you're like, yeah, of course I'm prepared to meet some people, and like everyone is like kind of open. So that's one of the places I met the most Japanese people, I think. But I think mostly it's a social thing to do with people you don't know that much about here. So because you kind of learn to know them with like the going out thing in clubbing. That's very social place. So you get there, and after that you have an experience in common, and you can talk about it. And the aftermath also of it is also like kind of a social bond you make during that night. So it's not only like partying on some stuff, but like starting also and have some memories with some people.
When I went to the big club for the social interaction alone, I really didn't have much fun. In general, you have to take into account that we're foreigners here.
I think you feel very connected to Sanjos, especially here in Tokyo, because I think in the like usual kind of stance in the society here, you don't feel connected at all with anybody, especially because I don't speak the language, but also in the kind of like touching and social norms way. When I'm in a club, you can feel like everybody's going out there and everybody's open, and like you can just bump into anybody or like just start talking to anybody as they wouldn't like ignore you or some stuff like in the daytime, but more like be open and very also interested into you answers. And I think that's how you can feel connected to some people, but also because like you're all overstimulated with like the same thing. I think music is a really good connector also, and you have also the kind of other way, like other place into the club that is a smoking area. So you just go there to talk even if you don't smoke. And that's a very, very social place. So I think, yeah, clubbing is very a social place when you can feel connected very easily in a lot of different ways.
I used to expect to, be able to meet a couple of folks and talk to them, maybe have some kind of connection. That was kind of like part of my vision before. But now, after having been to clubs a couple of times and after having, experienced what clubbing is like, it's very rare for me to maintain a connection from someone I met in a club. So I don't really expect anything when it comes to making connections. And again, as I said, I usually go with friends, so it's not like I'm looking for other connections. And really, I'm really just there to spend my time with friends, hang out, and dance to the music.
I've met a lot of people in clubs, especially through my work as a photographer. I don't really see clubbing as a social performance because I don't go out to socialize in the traditional sense, or to be seen, or to be present, or to present an image of myself. But this becomes more complex when I'm working, even if I stay very focused and in my own bubble when I'm shooting. It's essential for me to feel the energy of the crowd because I try to capture relationships between the music, the performers, the audience, the people. And so there is inevitably a social dimension involved, but it's always in service of the artistic experience.
I would say the best times I had was when I went there with like a single friend or two maximum, because you kind of can talk to everyone and anyone, and bonus points if your friends are Japanese, which makes other Japanese people feel relaxed to talk to you. Because I've been to clubs with foreign friends, and again, you kind of get like excluded, I would say. Usually, other people also come in groups of two or three. So, if your group is too big, if you're like 11 people in a club, no one's gonna approach you because you're too intimidating. Your group is too big. And if you go alone, people don't really know what to expect. I think being a foreigner plays into that hand because you're a foreigner, you're alone in a club, so no one really is going to approach you. You don't seem like that. Again, you seem intimidating because you're like an alien. They would say don't get like too attached to people in the club because people are usually like more open. People seem to be more friendly. People are doing something that they don't do normally. Shy people are not that shy in the club. You see a lot of people just letting out all their emotions through their bodies, which is beautiful, I would say. But yeah, they say that don't really get accustomed to people in the club don't think that the interactions you have in the club are going to be permanent. I've made friends in clubs where they were a wholly different person outside. And I've been to clubs with some friends who I felt were transformed as soon as they went into the club.
I'm fairly aware of people clubbing with me, but it's usually just me and my friends, in our own world. And I mean, there are people who engage with me or with my friends, and I do register them when they engage with us. They are important to the clubbing experience because they make up the vibe. But I don't necessarily engage with them, nor do I necessarily want to engage with them. It's not as though they're what I seek for. So in that sense, me and my friends were a bit isolated in that we keep to ourselves, but we're connected because by clubbing together, even though we don't necessarily engage with each other, as long as we're in the same space, making up the same atmosphere, that's how we're connected.
I'm not the kind of guy that, like, I'm not super outgoing, like doing this and like hugging like random people and dancing with them, or like approaching people and try to like grind my body against them. I'm not that kind of person. That makes me super aware of other bodies because I'm trying not to touch them, not to touch other people a lot. Since I don't want to like get like hugged or like touched by strangers myself, I don't think a lot of people do here. I don't want to be that stranger who does that either. Not much different from cinema, actually. Going to cinema, you're like in this big auditorium where you're watching the film with everyone else. And the beauty of cinema is that everyone else is also watching with you, and everyone else is going to have kind of the same feelings as you. And that kind of is something that happens in a club too, because you're like at a live performance basically. So once this thing, like for example the bass drop that like the DJ does, once that happens, everyone gets excited and everyone around you's jumping, and we also start to jump. So you feel like you're part of this big audience.
Psychology and sociology describe this as a temporary loss of individual boundaries. Gustave Le Bon was one of the first doctors to theorize the idea that crowds produce a form of collective mind or collective body, where individual behaviors dissolve into a shared rhythm. In this state, things like self-consciousness, shame, or social performance tend to fade. I recognize myself a lot in this idea. When I dance in a crowd, I don't feel like I'm expressing something personal. My movements respond to the music, but also to the movement of the others, to the density of the crowd, to the energy circulating in the room, and I'm no longer feeling this alone.
The thing is, you don't expect people to behave normally, and you don't expect yourself to behave normal. And it's funny because in clubs, usually people are more friendly for some reason. I think it's alcohol.
Yes, I do drink when I go clubbing, but honestly, I don't drink so much. I rarely get drunk, but I do get tipsy, and that affects how I perceive the club. Things get a little hazier, and I feel lighter moving around. But I think that's the extent of alcohol influencing my clubbing experience.
I don't think I've ever been to a club without drinking alcohol. I think every time I went there was like it's like a part of it that doesn't you cannot really take it away. I would say I never took it away, so it's like a package that's together. Yeah, I don't know how a club feels without drinking an alcohol.
I think alcohol can boost kind of the affect you get into all the sensation you're gonna carry out with you. Usually, the affect is something that you will not perceive because it's not something that you can decide of, like how those sensory intervention are gonna be translated with your body. Because I think alcohol in this case is also a mean for you to kind of activate this reasoning and like just let it go. So affect can take over and you're like overstimulating yourself, but on purpose.
Staying aware allows me to read what's happening around me. It feels like deep meditation for me, and I don't need anything else than my brain for that.
How do I feel after the night ends? Always tired, especially when it comes to clubbing in Tokyo, because in Tokyo, I can't just go home in the middle of the night. I have to stay until the first train. That's because like getting a taxi back home is so overpriced. So I'm always exhausted. It's like all of my energy is just drained out of me. And honestly, this kind of, effect is one of the reasons why I don't want to club so often. And it's one of the reasons why, I have to be well prepared both physically and mentally before I agree to go clubbing.
It's always like, especially here in Tokyo, very early into the morning. So you have kind of a like strange feeling because you will just bump into like some morning people going to work and you're like just getting back to your bed.
This energy dip is definitely something I'm not looking for. But the energy spike I get while I club is something that I seek for. So they're basically two things, but the energy dip, which is what I mentioned, is not exactly the best thing ever.
Staying on the dance floor for hours is physical workout, like a marathon, but you're fighting fatigue, sensory overload, repetition, sometimes boredom. But there's also a form of commitment involved to me. That's why we do it. And it's a commitment to the music, a commitment to the artist, and to the community. Endurance is part of the experience. It's a form of devotion and resistance in a way. It's a way of existing outside of the rhythms imposed by daily life and social expectations.
I think mostly just happy, tired, and really like kind of starting to process what just happened. It's always like that. You're like kind of a bit sleepy, but still like, okay, what just happened? Sometimes you have also this feeling of just getting back by yourself, maybe alone, because you just went separated from like your buddies, just with a beautiful sunset or like with your bike or some stuff. So you can get very emotional also on your way back. Like, wow, this is a new day kind of feeling. You're just getting out of like all those sensory factors throw into you like for hours into the club, and like you're getting out, you have peace, you have no sound, you have just like the warmth of the sun just rising. So I think the contrast of this kind of sensory experience is very boosting in a way.
I never felt like overwhelmed where after a night ends I would be like, oh my god, I'm happy that the night ended, because I usually get out because before I feel that way. But in general, I usually feel like I could have stayed a little bit more. And I've had bad nights where I felt like I didn't want to dance, I didn't want to like talk to anyone, and I had just a bad night in general, and I left the club and it was even worse than when I entered. So definitely had that. And I have had nights when I felt like that was a fun night. I usually have, I would say, I have the feeling I actually have the most is not that it was a fun night, it was that should have stayed longer.
If we look at the origins of nightclubs, they didn't start as commercial entertainment spaces. They emerged from informal gathering spaces like saloon, tavern, bar, places where people met uh, to share stories, music, alcohol, and a sense of community first. In many cultures, these spaces functioned as escapes from everyday life, from work, and from social control. And the real cultural shift happened in the 60s when nightlife became a space of collective expression. New dances like the twist or the jerk appeared, and iconic venues emerged in cities like Paris with places such as the Golf Trio or the Bus Palladium. These were places to perform identity, youth culture, and social change. In the 70s, disco culture developed, driven largely by African American, Latino, queer communities in New York. And what is important to understand is that clubbing didn't emerge from dominant culture. It was born in marginalized communities who needed spaces where they could exist and express themselves and feel safe. This is why club culture is not just about music or pleasure, but it is a social, artistic, and political phenomenon.
I know that clubbing has its political roots and resistant roots, but when I club, I mean, for sure, my experience is different from other people's experience. But when I go clubbing, I don't necessarily get to create a community or engage in something bigger, like politically. Without community, I feel like it's hard to qualify clubbing as recovery or resistance. You know, the group or the community factor is, to me, really important for something to qualify as resistance, especially in the grander scheme of things. But I do know that other people's experience are completely opposite from mine. I do know that they get to create their communities, and in that sense, I can see that as some kind of resistance to a certain hegemonic or dominant order. But in my case, maybe it's because of the lack of initiative on my end, and maybe it's because I don't often go clubbing. It's more of an act of consumption to me. So I guess the frequency has to do with it. Frequency, intention, level of engagement, energy also. In a way though, like, there's this idea that clubbing resists like this neoliberal order of things by, you're resisting the idea of constantly having to be healthy in order to keep functioning for the capitalist neoliberal order. And in a way we can say that clubbing in that sense is resistant.
Later in the 70s and the 80s, club culture spread to cities like Chicago, London, Berlin, and beyond. And each city developed its own nightlife identity, shaped by local politics, laws, social norms, and architectural conditions. And Tokyo offers a particularly fascinating case because dancing itself has long existed in a legal gray zone. After World War II, in 1948, Japan introduced this law designed to control crime and sex work in the post-war context. And under this law, dancing was technically illegal in public venues unless a specific license was obtained, and even then, dancing was only allowed until midnight, which is like usually when we start. And for decades, nightclubs in Japan either had to strictly follow the regulation or operate underground, constantly at risk of being shut down.
Definitely do see clubbing as recovery. I don't see clubbing as resistance. In my opinion, no. It's very much consumption. It's just another side of consumption that tries to be resistant. Today's clubbing, no, I think is super commercial.
What is striking is that most clubs in Tokyo still exist within this legal ambiguity. The police can technically close a club based on a vague criteria, like the size of the dance floor or the lighting levels or the furniture placement, and this means that the right to dance is negotiated through space itself, and the way a room is designed can determine whether a practice is considered illegal or not. Anyway, this creates a constant atmosphere of uncertainty because there is also always the possibility that the night could be interrupted. In the 2010s, this law was reactivated more aggressively, which had a devastating impact on Tokyo's underground music scene, and many saw it as an attack on freedom of expression and as a form of increasing authoritarian control over bodies, pleasure, and underground cultural practices. Civil society responded with movements like the Let's Dance campaign, pushing back against these restrictions. But despite these constraints, nightlife in Tokyo has always found ways to exist. In the 80s and 90s, during Japan's economic bubble, people had money, time, and strong desire to party, and clubs started appearing across the city, often inspired by American music and culture. American occupation after World War II left a strong imprint on Japan's music scene. For example, disco, house, and techno arrived quickly. DJs from Detroit and Chicago were invited to play in Tokyo. Some clubs became iconic spaces where people could dance, still even if only into midnight.
I think like clubbing is a recovery, kind of, because it's kind of getting out there all those feelings you couldn't express, or like getting some of the real world out and just going into some kind of trance to kind of escape this. But also, I think this recovery is kind of into a consumption process. You wouldn't need this recovery to be as it is right now and as manipulated, as capitalistic in a way, if you had some other kind of experience that would allow you to kind of feel those light feelings more daily or in another way. So I think this kind of instrumentalization of like how you can get people to just forget about everything and do something, and so gain profit about this.
What I think is interesting here is the contradiction. Clubs are tolerated but never fully accepted, and they exist as negotiated spaces. This reinforces the idea of the club as heterotopia, so a space that is allowed to exist only on strict conditions at specific times and often hidden from the city's official image. And that obviously still affects the experience of it nowadays. In many cases, being present in these clubs is already a form of resistance against norms of productivity, against social expectations, against the idea that bodies should be controlled, efficient, and silent. And staying until the end of a set, continuing to dance despite the exhaustion, is a way of committing to the space, to the music, and to this community. Over time, club culture has been widely recuperated by capitalist logic. What started as spaces of resistance and community have often been transformed into commercial products. and lifestyle branding and standardized nightlife experiences. And in this process, music becomes a background noise, and the dance floor becomes a space of consumption rather than the sensory experience and the artistic expression. So this is why independent and underground scenes continue to matter.
やっぱりすごくいろんな国で一斉にやってそのエネルギーを集めてっていうところが一番やっぱり、同じ曲をかけるっていうのは最初はどうなのかなと思ったんだけれども、でもなんか去年やった時にすごくその時の高まり具合とかすごく良かったし、直接的な行動についてはやっぱりちょっと本当にもっと知らないといけないことがたくさんあると思います。ただこういった形ですごく自然な形でサポートできてるんだとしたらすごくそれは嬉しいです。やっぱりみんな本当にもっと生き生きと生きましょうっていうことですね。それが地球のためにもなると私は思ってます。
最後になんかメッセージあればみんなに。
メッセージレッツダンス